It is 2015. Elizabeth Holmes is Silicon Valley's brightest star. Her company, Theranos, claims it can save lives with a single drop of blood. Investors are throwing in millions. The media hails her as the next Steve Jobs. But what if this revolutionary idea never actually worked? What if the woman everyone trusted was not the visionary she appeared to be? And what if the empire built on hope, money, and ambition was built on lies? This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, the so-called prodigy who built a $9 billion empire on secrecy, deception, and one of the biggest frauds Silicon Valley has ever seen. The vision. In 2003, Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford at age 19. She claimed she had a vision. What if a small device could instantly test blood, saving lives and reducing costs for millions of patients? She said it would democratize healthcare. People wanted to believe her, and she knew how to make them feel. Holmes didn't look like the usual tech founder. She styled herself in black turtlenecks, modeled after Steve Jobs. She spoke in a deep, steady voice, making her sound calm and certain, even when the evidence was missing. She told stories about family members who suffered from illness, saying her technology could have saved them. Every detail of her image was carefully crafted to radiate brilliance and purpose. But at this point, Theranos didn't have working technology. Engineers inside the company were struggling. Tests produced inconsistent, often nonsensical results. Yet Holmes pressed on, raising money and promising that success was right around the corner. And investors, blinded by the promise of revolution, poured in millions without demanding pro. So why did no one stop to ask the hard questions? The rise of a star. By 2014, Theranos was everywhere. Elizabeth Holmes graced magazine covers that hailed her as the next Steve Jobs and the most important woman in business. She was worth billions on paper, and Theranos had raised more than $700 million from investors. Holmes surrounded herself with a boardroom full of power. Former Secretary of State George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, and General James Mattis joined her board. These men had influence, credibility, and political clout. But what they didn't have was medical expertise. That didn't matter to Holmes because their presence made Theranos look untouchable. The media played along too. They called Holmes a prodigy, a genius, the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. She was compared to Edison, to Einstein, to Jobs. Silicon Valley had found its new hero. But inside Theranos headquarters, the reality was very different. Employees knew the machines were failing. Blood tests that were supposed to detect serious conditions like HIV, cancer, and diabetes were giving false positives and false negatives. The miracle machine Holmes bragged about was so unreliable that employees often ran tests on commercially available devices made by other companies, then pretended the results came from Theranos technology. And somehow, the illusion kept going. Holmes was still smiling in interviews. The company was still expanding. The board kept standing behind her. And the investors, well, they were still convinced she was the real deal. But how long can a lie survive when people's health is at risk? The Walgreens gamble. One of the biggest turning points came when Theranos struck a deal with Walgreens. Suddenly, ordinary people could walk into pharmacies in Arizona and California and have their blood drawn for Theranos tests. This was no longer a private experiment funded by billionaires. This was real healthcare for real patients with real consequences. And that's where the danger became impossible to ignore. Patients received terrifying results. Some were told they had HIV when they didn't. Others were told they were healthy when in fact they weren't. Lives were put at risk, but Holmes insisted the technology was sound because admitting failure wasn't an option. She had built her entire empire on the promise that Theranos worked, and if she admitted otherwise, it would all come crashing down. Behind closed doors, employees tried to speak up, but Theranos was a fortress of fear. Workers were monitored, emails tracked, and anyone who questioned Holmes was quickly silenced. Some were threatened with lawsuits. Others were escorted out of the building. Many chose to keep quiet, afraid of what would happen if they told the truth. So, who would have the courage to expose what was happening inside? The Expos. The first crack in the armor came from within. A group of young employees, refusing to remain silent, began communicating with a journalist at the Wall Street Journal named John Carreyrou. At first, even Carreyrou struggled to believe it. Could a company worth billions, praised by presidents and prime ministers, really be built on fake science? But as the stories piled up, the evidence was undeniable. Carreyrou uncovered manipulated demonstrations, doctored reports, and a company culture designed to hide the truth at all costs. When Holmes found out about the investigation, she didn't respond with transparency. Instead, she unleashed an army of lawyers. She hired one of the most feared attorneys in America, David Boies, to intimidate whistleblowers and threaten lawsuits against anyone who dared speak out. But what happened next stunned the world. In 2015, Carreyrou published his bombshell investigation. He revealed that Theranos' technology didn't work, that patients were being misled, and that Elizabeth Holmes was running one of the biggest scams in medical history. The story spread like wildfire. Regulators launched investigations. Walgreens suspended its partnership. Investors panicked. The empire Holmes had built on image and deception was beginning to collapse. But Holmes wasn't done yet. She hit the talk shows, defended herself in interviews, dismissed the reporting as lies, and kept insisting that history would prove she was right. The collapse. By 2016, the walls were closing in. Federal regulators banned Holmes from owning or operating a medical laboratory for 2 years. Walgreens sued Theranos for breach of contract. Patients began filing lawsuits of their own. The once untouchable company that had been worth $9 billion was now valued at nothing. Employees fled. Investors demanded answers. And yet, Holmes kept promising that the breakthrough was just around the corner. But it wasn't. In 2018, Theranos officially dissolved. A company once celebrated as the future of healthcare had vanished, leaving behind shattered trust, angry investors, and patients who would never forget the betrayal. And that's when the story shifted from a scandal to a criminal case. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes. In 2021, Elizabeth Holmes stood trial for fraud. The courtroom was packed with journalists, former employees, and even some of her old investors. The evidence was damning. Emails, reports, and testimony showed that Holmes knew the technology didn't work, but she kept selling the dream anyway. Patients testified about false results that left them terrified. Investors admitted they had been misled. Former employees described a culture of lies and intimidation. Holmes's defense argued that she hadn't intended to deceive anyone, that she truly believed in her vision, and that failure wasn't the same as fraud. But the jury didn't buy it. In January 2022, she was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud. She now faces more than a decade in prison. And here's the chilling part. Even after everything, there are still people who believe she had good intentions, that she simply dreamed too big and refused to let go. But does intent really matter when lives are put at risk? The lesson. The Theranos scandal is not only about Elizabeth Holmes. It is about how easily people can be fooled when they desperately want to believe in something. It is about a culture that chooses hype over evidence, charisma over facts, and image over truth. Why did Walgreens roll out tests without verifying accuracy? Why did investors hand over hundreds of millions without demanding proof? Why did the media celebrate Holmes without ever asking to see the data? The answers reveal something uncomfortable. We live in a world where a powerful story can outweigh reality, at least for a time. Elizabeth Holmes managed to fool the world by selling hope, and for years, people chose to believe her. Yet lies cannot survive forever because eventually reality always catches up. And that leaves one final question. If Elizabeth Holmes could deceive so many people for so long, who else might be doing the same thing right now? Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.